Open with a striking question: what if everything you've been told about relationships is wrong? What if staying single isn't a curse, but the greatest gift life can give you? Add a Stoic quote for depth: freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Epictetus promise value. In this video, we'll explore why Stoic philosophy shows us that staying single may be the best thing you can do for your happiness, your strength, and your peace of mind. Acknowledge modern pressure. Society tells us that happiness comes from finding the one. Movies, books, and even family traditions push us to believe that being single means being incomplete. Contrast with Stoicism, but the Stoics remind us that fulfillment never comes from another person, it comes from within. Set the stage. Today, let's break free from cultural expectations and see how choosing to stay single, even temporarily, can transform your life. Lesson 1: Emotional Freedom. I want to begin this lesson by asking you something simple. How often have you felt like your happiness depended on someone else? Maybe it was a partner who didn't call you back, a friend who pulled away, or even family members whose approval you kept chasing. If you're honest with yourself, you'll notice this truth: we give away our peace of mind far too easily. One look, one word, one silence from someone else, and suddenly, our whole day collapses. I remember a friend of mine, let's call him Michael. He was in his 50s, recently divorced, and he told me something that stayed with me. For years, I thought my wife's mood was my mood. If she was upset, I felt like a failure. If she was happy, then I allowed myself to breathe. But when the marriage ended, I realized I didn't even know how to feel on my own anymore. His story touched me deeply because I've seen this same pattern in so many people. Maybe you have, too. We hand over the keys of our emotions to someone else, as if they are the ones responsible for driving our lives. But the Stoics had a different view. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Emotional freedom begins exactly here, by taking back what we've given away. Think about it like this: imagine you are holding a cup of water. It's steady in your hands. Then, you give it to someone else. Suddenly, if they move too fast, if they stumble, if they decide to pour it out, you're left with nothing. That cup represents your peace. Why would you let another person carry it for you? Emotional freedom doesn't mean you stop loving people, or that you isolate yourself. No. It simply means you stop depending on them for your sense of worth. You stop making their actions the master of your feelings. Let me give you a simple example. Say you're waiting for a text message. Hours pass, and it doesn't come. Without emotional freedom, your mind starts spiraling: they don't care about me. I'm not important. Maybe I said something wrong. You suffer. But with emotional freedom, you remind yourself, their silence is not under my control. My peace is. My worth doesn't shrink because someone else is distracted, or busy, or even careless. Suddenly, the weight lifts. You are calm again, not because the world changed, but because you refuse to surrender your inner balance. That is the gift of Stoicism, the realization that nothing outside you can truly disturb you, unless you give it permission. Now, I won't pretend this is easy. It takes practice. Every day, you'll catch yourself reacting, attaching, expecting. But slowly, you learn to pause. You breathe. You step back. And in that moment, you reclaim your freedom. Michael, the friend I told you about, eventually found peace. He learned to enjoy walks by himself, to read books he had once ignored, to travel alone and discover new places without waiting for someone else to come along. He told me, "For the first time in years, I feel like I belong to myself again." And isn't that what we all want? To belong to ourselves. To know that even if the world around us shifts, if people leave, if things don't go our way, we still stand strong inside. This is emotional freedom. It is not about pushing people away, but about no longer being pushed around by their moods, their choices, or their absence. In the previous idea, we spoke about the lies society tells us about relationships. Now, you begin to see why independence of the heart matters so much. Because if you don't have emotional freedom, every relationship becomes a cage. And once you understand this, you are ready for the next lesson, self-mastery. Because freedom of the heart is only the beginning. What you do with that freedom, how you shape yourself, your habits, and your life, that is where real strength begins. Lesson 2, Self-Mastery. In the last lesson, we talked about emotional freedom, about reclaiming your peace, no longer letting someone else's moods control your own. But freedom is only the beginning. Because once you are free, the question is, what will you do with that freedom? That's where self-mastery comes in. I want you to picture this. A man is given a piece of land. The chains that once tied him to his master have been broken. He is finally free. But if he doesn't learn how to plant, how to water, how to cultivate, that land will remain empty. Weeds will grow, and his freedom will feel wasted. You and I, we are that man. Emotional freedom clears the soil. But self-mastery is the act of planting seeds. It's the decision to shape your life, rather than letting it shape you. The Stoics believed that the highest goal in life wasn't wealth, wasn't pleasure, wasn't status. It was virtue, living with wisdom, courage, discipline, and justice. And disciplined self-mastery is the foundation of all the rest. I once met a woman at a retreat in Colorado. She was in her early 60s, a widow, and she said something that I'll never forget. After my husband passed, I realized I had two choices. I could drown in grief, or I could rebuild my life. So I woke up every morning, made my bed, took long walks, and read the books I had always put off. Little by little, I found strength in keeping small promises to myself. That's the heart of self-mastery, not grand achievements, but quiet consistency. It's doing what you said you would do, even when no one is watching. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus was once a slave. He had no control over his body, no say in his circumstances. But he learned that his mind was always his own. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Think about that. True freedom isn't just about removing chains, it's about training your thoughts, your habits, your desires. Without that, even if the world calls you free, you are still a prisoner of your impulses. And haven't we all felt that? Maybe you promised yourself you'd exercise, but then the couch pulled you in. Maybe you told yourself you'd save money, but the impulse to spend whispered louder. Or maybe you vowed to stay calm in conflict, but the anger rose and carried you away. In those moments, you realize, the enemy is not outside. The battle is within. But here's the hopeful part, every small act of discipline is a victory. Waking up on time. Finishing what you start. Saying no to one more drink. Choosing silence instead of shouting. These are not just habits, they are training sessions for the soul. Over time, they build a quiet strength. A strength no one can take from you. My friend from Colorado told me, when I mastered the small things, the big things stopped scaring me. Grief didn't crush me anymore, because I knew I could trust myself to endure. That is self-mastery. It's not about perfection. It's about trust. The trust you build with yourself when you live with discipline and integrity. And once you taste it, you realize this is real power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. And that, my friend, is the kind of power no one can ever strip away. So, we began with emotional freedom, the release from chains others put on us. Now, with self-mastery, we start to shape our own lives, day by day. And as we move forward, we'll explore something that might surprise you, how even something as simple as a smile, when guided by Stoic wisdom, can become one of your greatest strengths. Lesson 3, Clarity of Purpose. In the last lesson, we spoke about self-mastery, about training your inner world so that you are no longer a prisoner of impulse, but the master of your choices. But mastery alone is not enough. Because what good is strength if you don't know where to direct it? That's why the Stoics spoke about purpose. They believed that a life without purpose is like a ship without a compass, constantly moving, but never arriving. Let me share a story. A man I once knew, let's call him David, spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder. He worked late nights, traveled constantly, sacrificed weekends, and earned more money than he ever imagined in his youth. From the outside, it looked like success. But when he retired at 60, he confessed to me, "I have no idea what I was really working for. I achieved everything I set out to do, but I don't feel fulfilled. I was busy for decades, but I was never truly alive." His words were heavy, but also a reminder, activity is not the same as purpose. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A man's worth is no greater than the worth of his ambitions." What he meant was simple: if your goals are shallow, your life will feel shallow. If your goals are rooted in virtue, in service, in truth, then your life will have weight, meaning, and dignity. Think about your own days. How often do you wake up and let the hours slip by, responding to emails, scrolling through screens, keeping yourself busy, but not moving closer to what matters most? It happens to all of us. And it leaves us with that quiet ache inside, that whisper, surely, life must be more than this. Clarity of purpose doesn't come by accident. It comes when you stop, reflect, and ask the deeper questions: what do I want my life to stand for? What legacy do I want to leave behind? If today were my last day, would I be proud of how I spent it? The Stoics remind us that life is short. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." When you know your purpose, you stop wasting. You stop scattering your energy on things that don't matter. Let me give you a practical picture. Imagine two archers. One has a target clearly in front of him. The other shoots arrows into the air, hoping they land somewhere meaningful. Which archer is more likely to feel accomplished? Which archer lives with less regret? Purpose is that target. Without it, you are always restless, always searching, always doubting. With it, even hardships become meaningful. When you know your why, you can endure almost anyhow. I remember a woman I met in Seattle who had dedicated her retirement years to mentoring teenagers who had no stable family. She told me, "I may not have the energy I had in my youth, but I wake up every morning knowing why I'm here. That alone gives me strength." Purpose doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't mean curing diseases or writing history books. Sometimes, it's as simple as raising your children with love, serving your community with honesty, or living each day with kindness. When you find your purpose, decisions become easier. Distractions lose their grip. And even loneliness, yes, even staying single stops feeling like emptiness. Because you are not waiting for someone else to give your life meaning. You've already found it. So, we began with emotional freedom, reclaiming your peace. Then we moved to self-mastery, training your habits. Now with clarity of purpose, we see where all that strength should be directed. And once you understand your purpose, the next step becomes clear: learning how to protect it. Because the world will always try to pull you away, to blur your vision, to drain your time. That's why in the next lesson, we'll explore the art of setting boundaries with grace, with wisdom, and with strength. Lesson 4, No Dependence. In the last lesson, we talked about clarity of purpose, about knowing your why, so your days are not wasted, but directed toward what truly matters. But here's something important: even with a clear purpose, many of us still stumble. And do you know why? Because we secretly tie our sense of worth and our progress to other people. This is where the Stoics are very clear: Real strength comes when you depend on no one else for your peace. I remember an older gentleman I once spoke with after a talk. He was in his late 60s and said, "I wasted half my life waiting for others to validate me. I worked hard, not for myself, but so my father would finally say he was proud. I stayed in a marriage that drained me because I was terrified of being alone. And now, looking back, I realize I never trusted myself enough to stand on my own." His voice broke as he said it, and I could feel the weight of his regret. But his honesty is a lesson for all of us. When your identity depends on someone else's approval, their presence, or their affection, you hand over your freedom. The Stoics warned about this. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, stop depending on others to applaud you. If you believe your worth rises and falls with their opinion, you will never be free. Think about how this plays out in daily life. You post something online, and if it gets likes, you feel proud. If it doesn't, you feel small. You walk into a room, and if people smile at you, you glow. If they ignore you, you shrink. This dependence, tiny as it may seem, makes you a slave to forces outside your control. Now, this doesn't mean we stop loving, stop connecting, or stop caring for others. Stoicism isn't about isolation. It's about balance. It's about remembering that other people can add to your happiness, but they should never be the source of it. Let me give you a picture. Imagine you are a tree. If your roots go deep into the soil of your own values, your own discipline, your own clarity of purpose, then when storms come, you remain standing. But if your roots are shallow, tangled around the approval or affection of others, then the first strong wind will knock you down. That's what dependence does. It makes you fragile. And here's the paradox: when you no longer depend on others, you actually become better at relationships. Because now, you don't cling, you don't beg, you don't fear being abandoned. You are free to love honestly, without neediness. I once heard a woman in her 50s say, "When I stopped expecting my partner to complete me, I finally enjoyed being with him. Because I no longer came from a place of fear. I came from a place of choice." That is the beauty of Stoicism. It teaches us that freedom and connection are not enemies. You can have both. But only if you first let go of dependence. Seneca put it simply, "He who needs less, lives more." So, think back for a moment. We started with emotional freedom, taking back your peace. We then spoke about self-mastery, training your habits. Then came clarity of purpose, knowing your why. And now, no dependence, learning to stand tall without leaning too heavily on anyone else. And once you can do this, you unlock a surprising gift: growth. Because when you no longer depend on others to carry you, you begin to carry yourself into places you never thought possible. And that is exactly what we'll explore in the next lesson: how personal growth before commitment creates a stronger, more meaningful life. Lesson 5: Growth before commitment. In the last lesson, we explored the idea of no dependence, how true freedom comes when you stand on your own, no longer making others the foundation of your happiness. But this lesson leads us naturally to an even deeper truth: before you give yourself fully to someone else, you must first grow into someone you can trust. The Stoics often reminded us that we cannot control the world, only ourselves. And if that's true, then what sense does it make to rush into commitments, marriages, long-term relationships, even friendships before we have first committed to our own growth? I once knew a young man in his late 20s. He was restless, eager to settle down, eager to find the one. He jumped from relationship to relationship, each time convinced he had found his future. But with each breakup, the same pattern repeated: disappointment, bitterness, self-blame. One evening, over coffee, he sighed and said, "Maybe I'm just unlucky in love." But the truth wasn't luck, it was that he hadn't yet grown into someone steady enough to share a steady life with another person. His roots were still shallow, and he was asking another soul to hold him up. The Stoics would call this a mistake of focus. Epictetus wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." In other words, become whole before you bind yourself to another. Growth before commitment doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean waiting until every flaw is gone or every weakness is fixed, because that day will never come. What it means is learning to know yourself, to shape yourself, to carry your own burdens before asking someone else to share them. Think of it like building a house. If the foundation is weak, it doesn't matter how beautiful the walls or the furniture are, the house will not last. But if the foundation is strong, even storms cannot bring it down. You are that house. Your personal growth is the foundation. Commitment without growth is decoration without strength. Let me give you a simple image. Imagine two people entering a relationship. One comes in half-formed, expecting the other to complete them. The other comes in whole, ready to share their life, but not dependent on the other for survival. Which relationship do you think has the better chance of lasting? When you grow first, you bring peace instead of chaos. You bring clarity instead of confusion. You bring love as a gift, not as a demand. I remember a woman in her 40s who had spent years focusing on her career, her health, and her passions before she ever considered marriage. Some people judged her, said she was too late. But when she finally did marry, she said, "Because I had already built myself, I wasn't afraid of losing myself. That made the love I gave purer, freer." That is the heart of this lesson. Growth before commitment means you do not enter a bond out of fear of loneliness, but out of freedom and choice. You give, not because you are empty, but because you are already full. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." When your thoughts are strong, disciplined, and wise, your commitments naturally reflect that strength. But if your thoughts are weak, no relationship will save you from yourself. So, where does this bring us? We began with emotional freedom, then self-mastery, then clarity of purpose, then no dependence. Now, with growth before commitment, we see that true love, true connection comes not from rushing, but from patience, from cultivation, from becoming before belonging. And once you understand this, you begin to see relationships in a new light. Not as cages, not as rescues, but as choices made from strength. Which leads us to the next lesson, how Stoicism teaches us to embrace solitude not as emptiness, but as the richest soil where growth truly begins. Lesson 6, Solitude equals strength. In the last lesson, we talked about growth before commitment, the importance of building yourself before binding yourself to another. That wisdom leads us straight here, to solitude. Because it's in solitude that growth truly takes root. And the Stoics remind us solitude is not weakness. Solitude is strength. I remember once walking alone through Central Park on a cold winter morning. Couples strolled hand in hand, parents pushed strollers, joggers passed by in groups. And there I was, alone. For a moment, a familiar thought crept in, why am I here by myself? Shouldn't I have someone beside me? But then I realized something powerful, the ability to walk alone, and still feel whole, is not a curse. It's a kind of quiet power. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man of his time, often wrote in his private journal, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He ruled an empire, yet he turned inward for strength. Solitude, when embraced, is not about isolation. It's about connection to yourself, to nature, to the deeper truths of life. It's the space where you can hear your own thoughts without the noise of the world. It's the ground where self-mastery, clarity of purpose, and growth all begin to flourish. Yet many people fear being alone. They fear the silence, the empty rooms, the quiet evenings. Why? Because in solitude, there are no distractions. You're left face to face with yourself. And if you haven't learned to befriend yourself, that can feel unbearable. But here's the paradox: once you learn to sit with yourself, you realize you're not empty, you're abundant. Let me share a story. A woman I met in Arizona told me that after her divorce, she dreaded going home at night. The house felt too quiet, the bed too big. She filled her evenings with television, with shopping, with noise, anything to avoid the silence. But over time, she grew tired of running from herself. So, she decided to do something different. She began journaling. She took long walks at sunset. She sat quietly on her porch with a cup of tea. At first, it was uncomfortable. But slowly, she began to feel at peace in her own company. One day, she smiled and said to me, "I realized I wasn't lonely. I was just unused to being with myself. And now, I love it." That's the transformation solitude brings. What once felt like emptiness becomes a sanctuary. The Stoics would say, if you cannot stand to be with yourself, how can you expect anyone else to? Solitude is the test of your inner strength. If you can sit alone and feel whole, then you've already conquered one of life's hardest battles. And think of the practical strength it brings. When you no longer fear solitude, you stop clinging to unhealthy relationships. You stop rushing into commitments out of desperation. You choose better, because you know you don't need someone, you simply want someone. That difference changes everything. Seneca wrote, "The greatest blessings of mankind are within us, and within our reach." Solitude reminds us of that truth. The strength you seek, the peace you long for, the clarity you crave, it's already inside you. But you only discover it when you make space for silence. So, we've walked a long way together: emotional freedom, self-mastery, clarity of purpose, no dependence, growth before commitment. And now, solitude, the strength to stand alone, not as a punishment, but as a gift. And here's the beauty: once you learn to stand alone with strength, you no longer fear relationships. You no longer fear loss. You no longer fear life's changes. Because you know you are whole, even when you are by yourself. Which leads us to the next lesson: how wholeness transforms the way we connect with others. Because when solitude becomes strength, you enter relationships no longer as half a person seeking completion, but as a whole soul ready to share. Lesson 7: Freedom to serve higher values. In the last lesson, we discovered that solitude is not weakness but strength. The ability to stand alone without fear makes you whole. And once you are whole, something remarkable happens: you gain the freedom to live, not just for yourself, but for something greater. The Stoics often reminded us that a life aimed only at pleasure or personal gain will always feel shallow. True fulfillment comes when you serve values higher than yourself: virtue, justice, wisdom, compassion. That is where freedom leads, to service, not to selfishness. I once met a retired firefighter in Boston. He told me that after 30 years of running into burning buildings, people often asked if he missed the adrenaline, the excitement, the action. But he shook his head and said, "No, what I miss is the clarity. Every day, I knew my purpose. I wasn't living for myself, I was living to protect others. That's what gave my life meaning." His words struck me, because they echo what the Stoics taught centuries ago. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But mastery isn't the final step. Once you master yourself, you're no longer enslaved by fear, by opinion, by desire, and you're finally free to give yourself to higher values. Think about it. When you depend on others for happiness, you serve them out of neediness. When you lack self-mastery, you serve your impulses. When you lack clarity of purpose, you serve distractions. But when you are free inside, you can choose to serve what is good, what is lasting, what is noble. Let me share another story. A woman I know in California built a successful business in her 30s. She had everything she thought she wanted: money, status, recognition. But one day, after years of chasing growth, she asked herself, so what? What now? That question led her to start mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially women who came from nothing, just as she once had. And she told me, for the first time in my life, I feel like my success means something. This is the freedom Stoicism points us toward, the freedom to move beyond the self. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about this. Even as emperor, with absolute power, he reminded himself, what is not good for the beehive cannot be good for the bee. In other words, your life is tied to the greater whole. To live only for yourself is to miss the point. But notice the order. You cannot serve others well if you are empty. You cannot uplift others if you are dependent, unsteady, or lost in confusion. That's why the path begins with freedom, self-mastery, clarity, growth, solitude. Each lesson builds a foundation, so that when you finally give yourself, you give from strength, not weakness. And this is where many people misunderstand Stoicism. They think it is about withdrawing from life, about cold detachment. But in truth, Stoicism prepares you to engage with life more deeply. It strips away the noise so you can live with purpose, with virtue, with service. Seneca said, wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness. And when you are no longer enslaved by fear or dependence, you are free to answer that opportunity. So now, think about your own life. What values guide you? What higher purpose are you free to serve, now that you are no longer chained to the need for validation, or to the fear of being alone? Because this is the paradox of freedom, when you no longer live for yourself alone, you finally discover who you truly are. And from here, the path leads us to the final lesson, how aligning with higher values not only frees you, but allows you to leave behind something greater than yourself, a legacy that continues long after you are gone. Summarize, staying single doesn't mean rejecting love, it means refusing to be a prisoner of it. Add perspective, when you master solitude, you are no longer afraid of losing anyone. And ironically, that's when you become most capable of real love. Stoic wisdom, he who needs least, enjoys most. Seneca. Emotional close, being single gives you the freedom to become who you were meant to be. And once you've found yourself, you'll never again lose yourself in someone else. Call to action, if you found value in this, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. Suggest next video, and if you want to go even deeper, watch my video, 10 Stoic Principles so that nothing can affect you. It will show you how to build unshakable resilience in every area of life.